inflation, corruption, and many other important issues. The theme today is the past and future of liberalism. Perhaps I should add classical liberalism here. We have a panel with three distinguished scholars. Perhaps one of the most virtuous ladies I know, Professor Deidre Mccloskey. And I have to look down here. She's a professor of economics, history, English, and communication at University of Illinois at Chicago. And I asked the speakers to keep down the introductions to around 20 minutes in order for us to hear in the more general session have a broader discussions about the future of liberty. It seems to me that the dark forces are moving forward. We've heard some examples in this conference. As soon as we turn on television or read any paper, we see other dark forces moving forward. The indexes of economic freedom depends a little bit which index you use. They peaked around 2007, actually before the financial crisis. Coming from Sweden, we've had a 25, 30 years long reform period where things moved in the right direction. That process is stopping now. So I would like you to think about this, and we will have a more general discussion about these things, and we will discuss the specific papers more thoroughly in the breakout sessions. So, David, please.
Floor is yours. You're first, I'm first. David's first.
Deidre, yes. Well, can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me good? Well, I have a microphone. It's right here. Is it on?
Yeah.
Okay. Can you hear me over in the corner? Good. Yes. Okay. I'm going to speak. I have a speech defect. And you can either adjust to it or run screaming through the room. I don't care. I'm going to talk about the past of liberalism. I've completed last week the third volume of what's now a trilogy called the Bourgeois Era. I sent in, 1 week ago, I sent in the manuscript of the third volume to the University of Chicago Press. There have been 2 previous volumes because that makes 3, you see. The first was called The Bourgeois Virtues. When I first gave a talk on this at the Institute for Advanced Study at Princeton, hotbed of the left, I was called up in far Iowa by the secretary for the exact title. And I said, well, I'm going to talk about the bourgeois virtues, and she laughed. She laughed. And that, I think, encapsulates the problem that we face in defending the middle class, economic activity, freedom, is that our opponents, my friends on the left, laugh when they hear about the bourgeois virtues. So I argued in that book that on the whole, the middle class is not wholly corrupt by any means, and that virtues are encouraged, some virtues are encouraged by a commercial society such as we have. Mannkal is a communitarian political philosopher at the Institute for Advanced Study, and he contributed to a book of short essays called "Is the Market Moral?" Or perhaps it was, "Is the market corrupting?" And Michael said, yes, it's corrupting, and so are all the other systems corrupting. Which is to say that ethics is a work in progress. It's something that you need to defend and think about and be in favor of. You can't just assume that the structure, the institutions, will take care of ethics. So that was volume 1, was published in 2006. Then in 2010, we had Bourgeois Dignity, which was subtitled, Why Economics Can't Explain the Modern World. And it was, the first volume was ethical. Its subtitle was Ethics for an Age of Commerce. It was philosophical. It was even theological. I admit to being a Christian. And so that's what that volume was. And, but the second volume was more economic history. And I think I showed conclusively that the usual explanations of the Industrial Revolution and what I've come to call the Great Enrichment after the Industrial Revolution can't explain it. People like the explanation from coal. Well, the Chinese were using coal 1,500 years before the Europeans were. Indeed, a great many of the explanations usually offered for the Industrial Revolution and the Great Enrichment crash on the rocks of Hong Kong, so to speak. They're falsified by the fact that most technologies were invented in China. The blast furnace was invented in China. The use of coal for high temperature firing of ceramics was invented in China. The Chinese were doing operations with anesthetic 1,500 years before the Europeans were. So there's something wrong with the idea that there's something that Europeans are just superior and that's why they had an industrial revolution. This just doesn't work. And here our friends on the left can agree with us. The third, here's the second volume, available on Amazon.com cheap. Bourgeois Dignity, Why Economics Can't Explain the Modern World. And you have to imagine this is the second volume, and then the first, which I couldn't find when I was packing my bag, is here. And then this is the third volume, or actually it's half of the manuscript of the third volume, which is called, now hear this, Bourgeois Equality. How Betterment Became Ethical, 1600 to 1848, and then Suspect. How Betterment Became Ethical, 1600 to 1848, and then Suspect. So anyway, there's three, and that'll be enough for a box set, and like Harry Potter. And I will die, if I earn 1/100th of the royalties that she's earned from Harry Potter, I'll not only die happy, I'll die rich. There's the three. So this third volume, Bourgeois Equality, I want to seize the word back from the left, equality. I want it to be understood that the equality I'm talking about is not the equality of the French Enlightenment chiefly, but the equality of the Scottish Enlightenment. Adam Smith spoke of the liberal plan, he called it, of allowing people to do what they want within a framework of laws. And so the argument here is then why did Europe, most particularly northwestern Europe, starting in Holland in the 16th and 17th century, spreading to England specifically, England in the very late 17th century, when they adopted a Dutch king and a Dutch central bank and a Dutch Dutch public finance. I'm surprised they didn't adopt the Dutch language. They became extremely Dutch at the end of the 17th century. And that was the coming of liberalism to England and then eventually to Scotland after the Act of Union. And indeed, this liberalism began to characterize the English colonies and the Swedish colonies, for that matter, in the world. So the argument, the historical question in this very historically oriented book, which you should put your orders in early for, because it will sell out in the first week. Don't you think? Of course, they'll only print 100 copies. The question of the third volume is why in Northwestern Europe? Why did it happen there? Because it's plausible to argue, as I argued in the third book and in the first and the second book too, that the coming of liberalism, as we in this room understand it, of legal liberty and social equality, that is, equality before the law and equality of dignity in society, is a tremendous creator of new ideas, new technologies, new institutions, as we see especially, as I say, in the 19th century. I've only thought of this in the last few weeks, but there were many alleged discoveries in the 19th century about society. The discovery of historical materialism, the discovery that nations had characteristic histories, the alleged discovery, the discovery of eugenics, the discovery of materialism. Henry Bucko was one of the originators of this. Comtean rationality in social planning. Benthamite utilitarianism. All these discoveries of the 19th century, in my opinion, were mistaken, were wrong. And the clerisy, as I call it, the artists, the intellectuals, the journalists, the professors, the state bureaucrats, the educated class. The word clerisy comes from German, actually. They, up until 1848, they had been great supporters of liberalism, of equality before the law, and equality of social standing, against the hierarchies, against the great chain of being, as it was called, in which you were placed for your life in one position, you were placed in another, and that was it. And yet, as the 19th century proceeded, on both the left and the right, the clerisy and the excitement of the discovery of these wonderful new ideas about society forgot about its commitment to ordinary people, the common people. I think the real discovery of the 19th century is that ordinary people, common people, if released from hierarchy, are astonishingly creative. And here we are in Hong Kong, one of the great illustrations of this point. So the argument of the third line then is to look back into what it was about the history of Northwestern Europe that made for this birth of liberalism. And I would argue that it doesn't have to do with the Protestant ethic. It doesn't have to do with the coming of greed, as some people would think. It doesn't have to do with this capitalism, as Bill Easterly says. It's not. Capital fundamentalism is wrong, and it's wrong today in economic development, and it's wrong historically as well. It's not capital accumulation, it's not savings rates, it's not hard work that made the modern world. Poor people work hard too, you know. People in poor countries work very hard. So it can't be hard work such as Max Weber claimed. No, it's this ideological change, this ethical change. And that happened as a result, yes, of the Protestant Reformation, but not the way Max Weber thought it worked. It happened, indeed, these were Christians were construing, and they were believing Christians, in fact, believed more than they did before, and they're more obsessed with theological questions, so theology matters in the history of Europe in the 16th and 17th century is already obvious. And I speak of the 4 R's. Reformation, revolt, I'm thinking of the Dutch revolt against the Spaniards, revolution, such as the English Civil, and then finally the American and French revolutions, and reading. The invention of the printing press, of course, it had been invented in China long before, but the so-called invention of the printing press. Now, these 4 R's resulted in a 5th R, the revaluation of the middle class, of the bourgeoisie. And out of this respect for markets, for innovation, came the modern world. So liberalism, as we all wish, is not only ethical, it not only accords people the liberty and dignity that they deserve as God's creatures, but it resulted in tremendous increases in income. And I'll end on that note, because everyone in this room ought to realize how very much income has increased since 1800. I always give the hockey stick account of $3 a day, $3 a day from the beginning of Homo sapiens, $3 a day, $3 a day, whoosh, whoosh, up after 1800 to conventionally measured the American and almost the Hong Kong income per head of $130 a day. $3 to 130. That order of magnitude cannot possibly be explained by government intervention, trade unions, capital accumulation, savings rates, and coal, any of the usual suspects. It's an ethical change, a political change, a sociological change that explains the modern world. Thank you.